Good evening, and welcome. Tonight we are going to leave behind the noise of the modern world and quietly step into the early Middle Ages. This was a time long before electricity, engines, and crowded cities. Instead of focusing on famous kings or great battles, we will spend our time with ordinary people, the farmers, craftsmen, mothers, children, monks, and travelers whose quiet lives made up most of medieval society. Take a slow breath, settle into a comfortable position, and imagine that it is around the year 800. The Roman Empire has already faded into history. Many of its great cities still stand, but they are smaller than they once were. Some magnificent stone buildings remain, while others have slowly fallen apart after centuries without repair. Ancient roads still stretch across Europe, although many are cracked, covered with grass, and used only by merchants, pilgrims, or farmers leading their animals to nearby markets. Most people do not live in cities. Instead, they live in small villages surrounded by fields, forests, rivers, and open meadows. A village might have only 50 or 100 people. Everyone knows everyone else. Families often remain in the same place for generations, and many people spend their entire lives without traveling more than 20 or 30 miles from the place where they were born. Life moves slowly. There are no clocks hanging on the walls, no phones buzzing with messages, no trains rushing across the countryside. Time is measured by the rising of the sun, the ringing of church bells, the changing seasons, and the work that must be done before darkness arrives. For most villagers, every day begins before sunrise. The first sounds are often the gentle calls of chickens, the distant lowing of cattle, or the crackling of the household fire being brought back to life after the night. The air is cool, sometimes damp with morning mist, and the smell of wood smoke slowly fills the village. Homes are simple. Most are built from wooden frames packed with a mixture of clay, straw, and mud. The roofs are covered with thick layers of thatch made from reeds or straw. Stone houses exist, but they are uncommon outside wealthy estates or certain regions where stone is easy to find. Inside, the house is surprisingly small. Many families live in a single room where nearly every part of daily life takes place. Meals are prepared over an open fire. Clothes are repaired beside the same fire. Children play nearby while older family members work with wool, leather, or simple wooden tools. At night, everyone sleeps in the same room, often on straw-filled mattresses covered with wool blankets. The center of the home is the fireplace. Unlike modern fireplaces with tall chimneys, many medieval homes allow smoke to drift upward through small openings in the roof. As a result, the inside of the house often smells of smoke, and the wooden beams gradually become dark from years of soot. Furniture is limited. A heavy wooden table may stand in the middle of the room. A few stools provide seating. Large wooden chests store clothing, tools, blankets, and valuable possessions. Chairs with backs are considered something of a luxury in many villages. People own very few belongings. A modern bedroom often contains more personal items than an entire medieval household. Every object has a purpose, and almost nothing is thrown away. Clothing is repaired again and again. Wooden bowls are carefully maintained. Iron tools are sharpened for years, sometimes even decades. Breakfast is usually modest. A bowl of porridge made from oats or barley is common. Some families eat coarse bread baked several days earlier. Cheese, onions, beans, or cabbage may also appear on the table depending on the season. Fresh meat is uncommon for ordinary villagers and is usually reserved for special occasions or religious festivals. Water is not always the safest drink. For this reason, many adults and even older children sometimes drink weak ale. Unlike modern beer, medieval ale contains very little alcohol and serves as an ordinary part of everyday life rather than a luxury. Soon after breakfast, work begins. There is little separation between home and workplace because almost every family produces much of what it needs. Men, women, and children all contribute in different ways. The idea that only men worked outside while women remained indoors does not accurately describe most medieval villages. Daily survival depends on everyone's effort. The fields demand constant attention. Depending on the season, farmers plow the soil with oxen, sow grain by hand, remove weeds, repair fences, or gather the harvest. Every task follows the rhythm of nature. There is no way to hurry the growing of wheat or the changing of the seasons. Life in the early Middle Ages is physically demanding, but it is also remarkably predictable. Each sunrise brings familiar work. Each season follows the one before it. And for millions of ordinary people across medieval Europe, this slow rhythm continues year after year, generation after generation. One of the first responsibilities of the morning is caring for the animals. Even the smallest village household usually keeps at least a few animals. Chickens wander freely around the yard, scratching the ground in search of seeds and insects. They provide eggs throughout much of the year and require relatively little care compared to larger livestock. A family fortunate enough to own a cow possesses one of the most valuable resources in the village. Milk can be consumed fresh, turned into butter, or transformed into cheese that lasts much longer than fresh dairy products. Pigs are especially important throughout much of medieval Europe. They require less grazing land than cattle and can feed on scraps, fallen acorns, roots, and whatever they find while roaming nearby forests. Every autumn, many villages drive their pigs into woodland areas where they feed beneath oak trees before winter arrives. By late autumn, families often slaughter some of their pigs, preserving the meat with salt or smoke so it can be eaten during the colder months. Sheep provide something perhaps even more valuable than meat. They produce wool. Unlike food, which disappears once eaten, wool can be spun into thread, woven into cloth, repaired, reused, and passed down through generations. A single fleece represents many hours of careful work. First, it must be cleaned. Then the fibers are combed until they lie neatly beside one another. After that comes spinning, a slow process usually performed with a spindle, turning loose fibers into long strands of yarn. Finally, the yarn is woven into fabric using a loom that may occupy an entire corner of the house. These tasks demand patience rather than speed. Very little in the early Middle Ages happens quickly. Modern machines complete in minutes what once required days or even weeks of careful manual labor. Every shirt, blanket, sack, or cloak represents countless hours of human effort. The fields themselves are divided according to local customs that have developed over generations. Many villages gradually adopt systems that rotate crops between different sections of farmland. Although these methods vary from region to region, the basic goal remains the same: allowing the soil to recover while producing enough grain to feed the community. Medieval farmers understand from long experience that exhausted land produces weak harvests, even if they cannot explain the science behind it. Tools are simple but surprisingly effective. Wooden plows strengthened with iron tips cut shallow lines into the earth. Heavy hoes loosen stubborn soil. Sickles harvest grain one handful at a time. Axes shape timber for houses, fences, and carts. Every tool must be maintained carefully because replacing iron is expensive. A damaged blade is repaired whenever possible rather than discarded. Blacksmiths occupy an important position within nearly every rural community. Their workshops are filled with the sounds of hammers striking hot iron against an anvil. Sparks briefly illuminate the dim interior, while bellows force air into charcoal fires hot enough to soften metal. Farmers depend upon the blacksmith to repair plowshares, sharpen axes, create nails, fashion horseshoes where horses are common, and produce countless small objects that make everyday work possible. Despite their skill, blacksmiths rarely become wealthy. Iron itself remains costly, and most customers pay not with coins but with grain, livestock, cloth, or labor. Much of the medieval economy functions through exchange rather than regular cash payments, especially in isolated villages where coins circulate only occasionally. Money certainly exists, but many ordinary people handle surprisingly little of it. A peasant family may spend weeks or months without touching a single silver coin. Instead, obligations are settled through work, harvest shares, or goods produced by the household. A day's labor repairing a neighbor's roof may later be repaid when that same neighbor helps gather the wheat before autumn rains begin. This close dependence creates strong local relationships. Survival is rarely an individual achievement. When storms damage a roof, neighbors assist with repairs. When illness prevents a family from harvesting its crops, relatives and nearby households often contribute labor. During especially harsh winters, communities that cooperate generally fare better than those divided by constant conflict. Not every year brings abundance. Harvests depend upon weather that no one can control. A late frost may destroy young crops. Heavy rain can rot grain before it is collected. Long droughts reduce yields dramatically. Even small changes in climate may determine whether a village enjoys comfortable stores of food or faces months of careful rationing. Because of this uncertainty, medieval people become exceptionally skilled at avoiding waste. Bread that grows stale is softened in soup. Animal bones are boiled repeatedly for broth. Vegetable scraps feed pigs or chickens. Worn clothing becomes patches for newer garments before finally serving as cleaning cloths or stuffing for mattresses. Very little reaches the point of being completely useless. The rhythm of work changes with the seasons, but seldom disappears entirely. Spring demands preparation. Summer requires maintenance. Autumn brings intense weeks of harvesting from sunrise until sunset. Winter appears quieter, yet countless indoor tasks remain unfinished. Tools need repair. Firewood must be cut. Wool waits to be spun. Nets require mending. Baskets are woven. Barrels are inspected. Every season carries responsibilities that cannot be postponed indefinitely. Children grow up watching these routines every single day. Education within most villages happens through observation rather than formal instruction. A young boy learns to guide oxen by walking beside his father. A young girl becomes familiar with spinning wool after years of helping her mother prepare fibers. Skills are transferred naturally from one generation to the next, not inside classrooms, but through daily participation in ordinary work. By the age of 10 or 12, many children already contribute meaningfully to the household economy. Every pair of hands matters. In a world where survival depends on physical effort, even small contributions have value. A child carrying a small basket of firewood or helping prepare food becomes part of the larger effort that keeps the household functioning. There is little separation between learning and working because daily tasks themselves are the lessons that prepare children for adulthood. However, village life is not only about labor. Although much of the day is spent working, people also create moments of rest, celebration, and community. Medieval society is often imagined as a place of endless hardship, but ordinary people still found ways to enjoy simple pleasures. A successful harvest, a wedding, a religious festival, or the arrival of traveling performers could transform the atmosphere of an entire village. Evenings are usually quieter. As the sun begins to disappear, the pace of work slows. Tools are placed aside. Animals are brought back to their shelters. The fields become darker, and the sounds of the village gradually change. The voices of workers returning home replace the noises of daytime activity. Inside the homes, families gather around the fire. The evening meal is often the most important moment of the day because it is one of the few times when everyone is together. Food is usually simple but filling. A thick soup or stew made from vegetables, grains, and whatever ingredients are available may be placed over the fire for many hours. Bread remains one of the most important foods in medieval Europe, and for many families, it forms the foundation of almost every meal. The quality of food depends heavily on social position. A wealthy, noble household experiences a very different diet from that of a farming family. Nobles have access to larger quantities of meat, imported spices, fine wines, and a wider variety of foods. Ordinary villagers rely mostly on grains, vegetables, dairy products, and seasonal ingredients produced close to home. Yet, even wealthy people are still limited by the technology of their time. There are no refrigerators to preserve fresh food for months. There are no modern transportation systems bringing products quickly across continents. Distance and seasons control what people can eat. A fruit that grows in one region may never appear on the table of someone living only a few hundred miles away. Salt is especially valuable. Before modern preservation methods, salt allows people to keep meat and fish edible for much longer periods. Because of this, regions with access to salt production often become economically important. A simple mineral becomes one of the foundations of medieval trade. Spices are also highly valued, although they are mostly associated with wealthy households. Products such as pepper, cinnamon, and other exotic ingredients travel enormous distances before reaching European markets. Their rarity makes them expensive symbols of status. For most villagers, these flavors remain distant luxuries rather than everyday additions to food. The village itself changes after dark. Without widespread artificial lighting, darkness arrives quickly. A medieval night is much darker than the nights experienced in modern cities. There are no streetlights, glowing windows from distant buildings, or constant sounds of machines. Outside the small circles of firelight, the countryside becomes almost completely black. This darkness influences daily habits. People generally sleep earlier than modern societies do. Remaining awake requires fuel for lamps or fires, and these resources are not unlimited. Long winter nights may provide more time indoors, but families still conserve candles and oil whenever possible. Sleep patterns are also different. Many historians believe medieval people often experienced a first period of sleep followed by a short period of wakefulness during the night before returning to sleep again. During this quiet time, people might pray, talk softly with family members, tend the fire, or simply remain awake for a while before resting again. Night is not feared everywhere, but it is respected. The darkness hides dangers that are less common today. Roads become difficult to travel. Forests become uncertain places. Wild animals are more active. Bandits and thieves may use darkness as protection. For these reasons, most ordinary people prefer to remain near their homes after sunset. The local church often becomes the center of village life. In many early medieval communities, the church is not only a place of worship. It is also a gathering point, a place where important announcements are made, and a symbol of shared identity. Religious festivals organize the calendar, and many aspects of daily life are connected to religious traditions. The sound of church bells, where available, helps structure the day. Bells announce times for prayer and remind people of the passing hours. In a society without mechanical clocks, these sounds provide a common rhythm for the community. They connect the activities of farmers, craftsmen, and religious communities. Monasteries also play a unique role during this period. While most villagers spend their lives farming, monks dedicate themselves to religious study, prayer, and the preservation of written knowledge. Their communities often become centers of learning, agriculture, and craftsmanship. Monasteries produce manuscripts, grow crops, care for travelers, and maintain traditions inherited from earlier centuries. The written word is rare compared to today. Most people cannot read or write. Knowledge is usually passed through speech, memory, and practical experience. Stories, songs, religious teachings, and family traditions carry information from one generation to another. This does not mean medieval people lack intelligence or curiosity. They possess detailed knowledge of their environment. Farmers understand weather patterns, soil conditions, animal behavior, and the changing seasons. Craftsmen develop highly specialized skills through years of practice. Healers recognize plants and remedies that have been used for generations. Their world is different, but it is not empty of knowledge. For most people in the early Middle Ages, the greatest events of history happen far away. A king may win a battle hundreds of miles away. A new ruler may take control of a distant territory. Armies may move across lands that ordinary villagers will never see. Yet the daily lives of most people remain remarkably steady. The arrival of spring, the growth of crops, the health of animals, and the success of the harvest are often more important than political changes occurring in distant places. This does not mean that rulers and wars have no effect. Taxes, military conflicts, changing borders, and the demands of powerful landowners can influence village life. A new lord may control the same fields that previous generations worked. A war between kingdoms may interrupt trade routes or bring soldiers through rural areas. But for many farmers, the rhythm of the seasons remains the strongest force shaping their lives. Land is the foundation of medieval society. Almost everything depends on it. Food comes from the fields. Animals depend on the grasslands. Houses require timber from forests. Tools require materials taken from the earth. Even clothing begins with resources produced through the land, whether from sheep that provide wool or plants that create fibers. Because land is so important, ownership and control of land become central issues throughout the medieval world. Most villagers do not own large areas of farmland. Instead, they work land controlled by local nobles, religious institutions, or wealthy families. In exchange for protection and the right to cultivate the soil, farmers provide a portion of their harvest or complete certain duties. This relationship gradually develops into what historians call the feudal system. Although the exact structure varies greatly from one region to another, the early Middle Ages are not a single, uniform world. Life in a village near the Mediterranean is different from life in the forests of Northern Europe. A farming community in the British Isles faces different challenges from one in the lands that will later become France or Germany. Climate, geography, traditions, and local customs all shape daily existence. In warmer regions, people may grow different crops and use different building materials. In colder northern areas, thick wooden houses and stronger winter preparations become more important. Forests provide fuel, building materials, and food sources. Hunting and gathering wild resources may play a larger role than in regions dominated by open farmland. Forests are not simply empty spaces in the medieval imagination. They are places of opportunity and danger. People collect firewood, gather berries, search for medicinal plants, hunt animals, and allow pigs to feed beneath trees. The forest provides valuable resources that help communities survive. At the same time, forests represent uncertainty. Paths are difficult to follow. Travelers can become lost. Wild animals live beyond the edges of settlements. Stories and beliefs often connect forests with mystery and the unknown. For many medieval people, the boundary between the familiar village and the deep forest represents a transition between safety and uncertainty. Travel itself is a difficult experience. Most ordinary people rarely travel far from their birthplace. A journey that takes only a few hours by modern transportation might require an entire day or longer on foot. Roads are often uneven, muddy, and dangerous, especially during winter. A person traveling between villages may need to cross forests, rivers, and open countryside. Bridges exist in some areas, but many rivers must still be crossed using simple boats or shallow areas where people and animals can pass. Weather conditions can quickly change a manageable journey into a dangerous one. For those who do travel, the experience reveals a much larger world. Merchants carry goods between settlements. Pilgrims visit religious sites. Soldiers move between territories. Craftsmen search for customers. Messengers carry information between powerful rulers. These travelers connect communities that would otherwise remain isolated. Markets become important meeting places. A market day is not only about buying and selling goods. It is also a social event. People from nearby villages gather together, exchange news, meet friends, and learn about events beyond their immediate surroundings. A farmer may arrive carrying eggs, grain, wool, or vegetables. A craftsman may bring knives, pottery, shoes, or tools. A merchant may offer salt, cloth, or objects brought from distant regions. For many villagers, market day may be one of the few occasions when they see people from outside their own community. The sounds of a medieval market are very different from modern shopping areas. There are no engines, electronic payments, or bright signs. Instead, there are voices calling customers, animals moving through crowded spaces, the sound of wooden carts, and the constant conversations of people exchanging goods. Trust plays an important role. Many transactions depend on reputation. A person known as an honest trader is more likely to attract customers. A dishonest seller may damage relationships that took years to build. Medieval communities rely heavily on personal connections. A person's identity is often connected to their family, village, occupation, and relationships with neighbors. Unlike modern societies where people may move frequently and create new identities in different places, medieval individuals are usually deeply connected to the location where they live. Belonging to a community provides security. A person who knows the land, the seasons, and the people around them has a better chance of surviving difficult years. Isolation can be dangerous in a world where illness, accidents, and poor harvests are constant possibilities. This strong connection to community also shapes celebrations. Religious festivals, seasonal gatherings, weddings, and local traditions break the ordinary routine of work. They provide moments of music, food, conversation, and shared experience. These occasions are especially important because everyday life requires discipline and patience. A successful celebration reminds people that life is not only about survival. Belonging is one of the strongest feelings that connects people in the early Middle Ages. A person is rarely seen as completely separate from the group around them. Family, neighbors, and local traditions shape how people understand themselves. A person's place in the village is connected to what they do, who their relatives are, and the responsibilities they carry. This connection begins at birth. A child entering the world becomes part of a family network that may include parents, grandparents, siblings, and distant relatives living nearby. In many communities, extended families remain close because cooperation is essential. Raising children, caring for the elderly, repairing buildings, and preparing for difficult seasons all become easier when several generations work together. The household is the center of social life. It is not only a place where people sleep. It is a workplace, a storage area, a place of education, and a place where traditions are passed down. The knowledge needed to survive is usually learned inside the home. A child does not receive lessons from books. Instead, they learn by watching. They observe how bread is prepared, how animals are cared for, how tools are repaired, and how the land changes throughout the year. Every activity contains information collected through centuries of experience. The knowledge of older generations is extremely valuable. An experienced farmer understands when the soil is ready. An older craftsperson knows how to repair a broken tool. A person who has lived through many winters understands how much food must be stored before the cold arrives. Age brings respect because experience can mean survival. The elderly are not viewed only as people who can no longer work. They are often the keepers of memory and tradition. They remember family histories, local customs, and lessons learned from previous generations. Stories play an important role in preserving this knowledge. In a world where written records are limited, spoken stories become a way of carrying the past into the future. Around fires in the evening, people share tales of ancestors, heroes, saints, battles, and important events. Some stories are meant to entertain. Others teach lessons about courage, loyalty, kindness, danger, and responsibility. The spoken word has great power because it is one of the main ways communities preserve their identity. Music also forms part of everyday life. Songs accompany work, celebrations, religious ceremonies, and gatherings. Simple instruments such as flutes, drums, and stringed instruments provide entertainment. Many songs are connected to seasons, labor, or important moments in life. A harvest song, for example, can help workers maintain a rhythm while gathering crops. A religious song can bring a community together during a festival. A traditional melody can remind people of places and people they have known for their entire lives. Entertainment in the early Middle Ages is usually simple but meaningful. There are no theaters, cinemas, or modern forms of entertainment. Instead, people find enjoyment through conversation, storytelling, games, music, and community gatherings. Board games exist in different forms across medieval Europe. Some are played by nobles, while others spread among ordinary people. Dice games are also known, although religious leaders sometimes criticize gambling because of concerns about excessive behavior. Children create their own forms of entertainment. They play with simple toys made from wood, cloth, or natural materials. A carved animal figure, a small ball, or a handmade object can provide hours of amusement. Many childhood activities involve imagination because manufactured toys are rare. Children also learn through play. Pretending to be adults, copying household tasks, or practicing skills helps prepare them for future responsibilities. A child playing with a wooden tool may later become someone who works with real tools. The boundaries between work and leisure are not as clear as they are today. Many activities combine both. A gathering where people repair equipment together may also become a social event. Preparing food for a celebration involves work, but it also creates opportunities for conversation and connection. Life is built around cooperation. Even simple tasks often require multiple people. Building a house is rarely the work of one person. Cutting timber, preparing materials, raising walls, and creating a roof require assistance from relatives and neighbors. When someone builds a new home, the community may gather to help. This cooperation creates bonds that can last for generations. However, village life is not always peaceful. Living closely together also creates disagreements. Arguments over land boundaries, animals damaging crops, unpaid obligations, or personal conflicts can occur. Without modern legal systems nearby, communities often depend on local customs and respected individuals to resolve disputes. Reputation matters greatly. A person known as reliable and fair gains trust. Someone known for dishonesty may find themselves isolated. In a small community where everyone knows one another, personal behavior has long-lasting consequences. Justice is often local. Village leaders, landowners, or religious figures may help settle conflicts. Punishments vary depending on the region and the seriousness of the problem. Some disputes are resolved through compensation, while others may involve stronger penalties. The idea of law in the early Middle Ages is closely connected to tradition. Many rules are not written in books, but remembered through generations. People know what behavior is accepted because they have grown up surrounded by the customs of their community. Religion also influences ideas about right and wrong. For many people, faith is not a separate part of life. It is connected to farming, family, illness, death, celebrations, and the changing seasons. Religious beliefs help explain the world and provide comfort during uncertain times. Certain days are marked by fasting, prayer, festivals, and gatherings. These moments divide the passing months and give structure to people's lives. For an ordinary villager, the passage of time is not measured by numbered dates on a calendar, and by the endless return of the seasons. The changing seasons are the true calendar of the early Middle Ages. A person living in this period does not separate life into workdays, weekends, and holidays in the way modern societies often do. Instead, life follows the natural world. The arrival of warmer weather, the first appearance of new plants, the migration of birds, and the changing length of daylight all signal what must happen next. Spring is a season of preparation and hope. After months of cold weather, the return of sunlight brings new energy to villages across Europe. The frozen ground begins to soften, animals spend more time outside, and farmers prepare their fields for planting. The first weeks of spring are filled with careful work. Tools are checked and repaired. Seeds saved from the previous harvest are brought out of storage. Fields that have rested during winter are prepared once again. Farmers understand that mistakes made in spring may affect the entire year. A poor planting season can lead to serious problems months later. There is no simple way to replace a failed harvest. Food cannot easily be transported from distant places, and storage methods are limited. For this reason, the beginning of the farming year carries both hope and uncertainty. The relationship between humans and nature is much closer than it is today. Modern societies can often protect themselves from poor weather using technology, transportation, and large food networks. Early medieval communities have far fewer protections. A storm, a cold summer, or a period of unusual rainfall can influence the lives of entire regions. This constant uncertainty creates a deep awareness of nature. People carefully observe the environment around them. They notice changes in animal behavior, plant growth, and weather patterns. Generations of experience create practical knowledge that helps communities make decisions. Farmers may not understand weather systems scientifically, but they understand their land. They know which areas flood easily. They know which fields produce better crops. They know where animals find shelter during storms. This knowledge is passed from parents to children through direct experience. As spring turns into summer, village life becomes increasingly focused on maintenance. The crops are growing, but they require constant attention. Weeds must be removed. Animals must be protected. Fences must be repaired. Water sources must be maintained. The work is repetitive, but repetition is a necessary part of survival. A field cannot be ignored simply because the seeds have been planted. Nature continues to change, and humans must respond to those changes. Summer days are long. The sun provides many hours of light, and people make full use of this time. Work often begins early and continues until evening. The hottest part of the day may bring a slower pace, especially in warmer regions, but there is always something waiting to be done. Women and men both contribute to agricultural work. Women often take part in planting, harvesting, food preparation, animal care, and textile production. They may also manage household resources, ensuring that stored food and materials are used carefully. Their work is essential to the survival of the family. Medieval households are not divided simply into one person working and another resting. Almost every member contributes according to age, ability, and social position. During the summer, animals also require attention. Cattle, sheep, and goats are moved to areas where they can find enough grass. Shepherds may spend long days outside with their animals, protecting them from predators and keeping them together. The relationship between humans and animals is very different from the modern world. Animals are not usually kept only as companions. They are sources of food, materials, transportation, and labor. A healthy animal can represent security for a family. A cow provides milk. A sheep provides wool. An ox provides strength for farming. A horse provides speed and transportation, although horses are expensive and not available to everyone. The value of animals is measured not only by what they provide today, but also by their importance for the future. As summer continues, attention slowly turns toward the coming harvest. Harvest time is one of the most important periods of the year. The success of the harvest determines whether families will have enough food during the following winter. Because of this, the entire community becomes focused on gathering crops before weather conditions cause damage. Harvesting grain is physically demanding work. Using simple tools, workers cut plants by hand and gather them into bundles. The process requires patience and coordination. A single field that can be harvested quickly with modern machinery may require many people working for many days. This period often creates a strong sense of community. Neighbors help each other because everyone faces the same challenge. A family that finishes its own fields may assist another household before bad weather arrives. The harvest is not simply an economic activity. It is a moment that determines survival. The grain collected during these weeks will become bread throughout the year. Some will be saved as seeds for the next planting season. Some will be used to pay obligations owed to landowners or religious institutions. Nothing is wasted. Every handful of grain represents months of preparation and uncertainty. After the hardest work is complete, communities often celebrate. Harvest festivals provide a temporary break from the demands of daily labor. People gather together, share food, offer prayers, and recognize the importance of cooperation. These celebrations are not only about enjoyment. They are reminders that survival is a collective achievement. No single person can control the weather. No single family can completely escape hardship. But together, a community has a better chance of facing the difficulties of the coming year. After the harvest celebrations end, the atmosphere of the village slowly begins to change. The bright and active days of summer become shorter. The mornings become colder. The fields that were once full of growing crops become quiet again. The rhythm of daily life begins to move toward preparation rather than expansion. Autumn is a season of gathering and storing. The work of the harvest does not end when the crops are collected. Grain must be cleaned, dried, and stored carefully. A small mistake during storage can destroy months of effort. Moisture, insects, and animals can reduce food supplies if people are not careful. Storage is one of the most important skills in medieval life. A family that produces enough food but stores it poorly may still face hunger later. For this reason, people develop many methods to protect their supplies. Grain is kept in special containers, wooden structures, or storage areas designed to keep it dry. Preserving food becomes a major part of autumn life. Fresh food is limited during the colder months, so people prepare for a time when fields will no longer provide abundant resources. Vegetables are dried or stored. Meat is salted or smoked. Fruits may be preserved. Herbs are collected and kept for cooking or traditional remedies. The arrival of winter is not unexpected. People spend months preparing for it. This preparation influences almost every part of life. More firewood is collected because heating a home requires a constant supply of fuel. Roofs and walls are inspected because a damaged shelter can become dangerous during cold weather. Clothing is repaired and thick blankets are prepared. Winter is not simply a colder version of other seasons. It changes the entire pattern of daily activity. Travel becomes more difficult. Roads become muddy or frozen. Fields require less attention. Outdoor work decreases, while indoor tasks become more important. The village becomes quieter. The sounds of harvesting disappear. The movement of people across open fields becomes less frequent. Smoke rising from houses becomes one of the most visible signs of life during the cold months. Inside homes, families spend more time together. The long evenings create opportunities for activities that cannot be completed during the busy farming seasons. Wool is spun into thread. Clothing is repaired. Wooden tools are carved and improved. Stories are shared around the fire. Winter is a season of patience. For modern people, winter can often be escaped through heating, transportation, and artificial environments. In the early Middle Ages, winter must be experienced directly. Cold enters homes. Food supplies must be carefully managed. Every resource matters. A successful winter depends on decisions made months earlier. Did the family collect enough firewood? Was enough grain stored? Were the animals protected? Were the tools repaired before the cold arrived? These questions determine comfort and survival. For many people, winter also creates a stronger dependence on neighbors. A sick person may need assistance collecting supplies. A damaged roof may require immediate repairs. A family with limited food may depend on support from relatives or the wider community. Community relationships become especially important during difficult times. However, medieval life is not only shaped by farming. Across Europe, many people live in towns and settlements connected to trade and craftsmanship. These places are smaller than modern cities, but they serve as important centers of exchange. A medieval town feels very different from a modern urban area. The streets are narrow. Buildings are often made from wood. Animals move alongside people. The sounds of craftsmen working fill the air. Smoke rises from workshops, bakeries, and household fires. Towns develop around important locations. Some grow near rivers because waterways make transportation easier. Others appear near castles, monasteries, bridges, or major roads. Geography plays a major role in determining where communities grow. Markets bring people together. Merchants arrive with goods from nearby regions. Craftsmen sell objects they have created. Farmers bring surplus products from the countryside. A town market connects rural and urban life. Farmers depend on towns for tools, clothing, and specialized products they cannot easily create themselves. Craftsmen depend on farmers for food and raw materials. This relationship creates a network of cooperation between different groups. Among the most important people in medieval towns are craftsmen. A skilled craftsman may spend many years learning a single profession. The creation of a useful object requires knowledge passed down through generations. A carpenter understands the qualities of different types of wood. A leather worker knows how to prepare animal hides. A weaver understands patterns, materials, and techniques. A metal worker knows how to shape and repair iron. These professions require patience and experience. Many crafts are organized through groups that later become known as guilds. These organizations help regulate quality, training, and professional standards. They also create connections between people who practice the same trade. Learning a craft usually begins at a young age. A child may become an apprentice, living and working with an experienced master. The apprentice observes, practices, and slowly develops the skills needed to work independently. This process can take many years. Becoming skilled is not a matter of learning a few instructions. It requires repetition, mistakes, and constant improvement. A medieval craftsman is not simply producing objects. They are preserving knowledge. Every tool, piece of clothing, building, and household item represents a long tradition of human creativity and adaptation. Although the early Middle Ages are often described as a difficult period, they are also a time when people develop remarkable methods for surviving and creating communities. Their world is smaller than ours. Their technology is simpler. Their lives are slower. But their understanding of cooperation, resources, and the natural world is deeply developed. And as another winter settles across the medieval landscape, people continue the same cycle that has shaped their lives for generations. The passing of years in the early Middle Ages is marked less by major events and more by repetition. A child is born into a world that follows familiar patterns. They grow up learning the same skills their parents learned. They work the same fields, walk the same paths, and participate in the same traditions that connected their ancestors to the land. For many people, the world they know is the world they will remain in. This does not mean people lack curiosity about places beyond their homes. Stories brought by travelers, merchants, soldiers, and religious figures create images of distant lands. People hear about great cities, powerful rulers, foreign customs, and places they may never visit. But travel remains limited. A journey that would take only a short time today could require days or even weeks in the early Middle Ages. Without reliable roads, fast transportation, or accurate maps, movement across large distances is difficult. Most people are deeply connected to their local environment. The nearby forest, river, fields, and village paths form the landscape of their entire lives. A person may know every corner of the surrounding countryside. They know where mushrooms grow after rain. They know which paths become dangerous after storms. They know where animals gather and where certain plants appear each year. This detailed knowledge creates a close relationship between people and their surroundings. The natural world is not separate from human life. The forest is a source of materials. The river provides water and sometimes fish. The fields provide grain. The animals provide food, clothing, and labor. Every part of the environment has a purpose. Because resources are limited, medieval communities develop a strong understanding of using what is available. Waste is a luxury that few can afford. A broken wooden object is repaired. A worn piece of cloth becomes something smaller. Food scraps are given to animals. Ash from fires may be reused. The idea of replacing something immediately is uncommon because producing new items requires time, skill, and resources. This careful approach extends to buildings as well. A house is not something easily rebuilt. Constructing a home requires timber, tools, labor, and cooperation. A family may live in the same building for many years, making repairs whenever necessary. The materials used in construction reflect the environment. Where forests are abundant, wood becomes the primary building material. Where stone is easier to obtain, stone structures become more common. Roofs may be covered with wood, straw, or reeds depending on local traditions. The inside of a medieval home is practical rather than decorative. Objects exist because they serve a purpose. A bowl is used for eating. A blanket provides warmth. A tool helps complete work. A chest protects valuable possessions. Decoration exists, especially among wealthier households. But for many ordinary families, usefulness is more important than appearance. Clothing follows the same principle. Garments are created to protect the body from weather and daily labor. Wool is especially important because it provides warmth and can be produced locally in many regions. Linen made from plant fibers is also used, especially for lighter clothing. Creating fabric is a long process. Before a person can wear a simple piece of clothing, many steps must happen. Animals must be raised. Fibers must be collected. Materials must be cleaned. Thread must be created. Fabric must be woven. The final garment represents many hours of work. Because clothing requires so much effort, people take great care of what they own. A damaged sleeve is repaired. A torn section is replaced. Older clothing may be transformed into another useful item. For ordinary villagers, owning several complete outfits is unusual. A small number of well-maintained garments may be enough for many years. Social differences, however, are clearly visible through clothing. Wealthier people have access to finer fabrics, brighter colors, and more elaborate designs. Clothing can show a person's position in society. A noble person's appearance communicates status. A farmer's clothing reflects practicality and daily labor. In medieval society, appearance carries meaning. The same is true for housing. A large stone castle, a monastery, a wealthy estate, and a small farming house represent different levels of society. Buildings reveal who has resources, power, and influence. The majority of people live simple lives, but they exist within a larger social structure. At the top are kings, nobles, and powerful religious institutions. Below them are knights, officials, merchants, craftsmen, and farmers. The exact organization differs from region to region, but medieval society is generally based on relationships between different groups. Protection and responsibility are important concepts. A powerful landowner may provide security and control over land. In return, people working that land provide labor, goods, or other forms of service. These relationships create stability, but also create dependence. A person's opportunities are often determined by the social position into which they are born. Moving between social groups is difficult. A farmer's child will most likely become a farmer. A craftsman's child may learn the same trade. A noble family's child may inherit responsibilities connected to land and leadership. However, medieval society is not completely without change. Towns grow. Trade expands. New ideas spread. Individuals sometimes improve their position through skill, marriage, service, or opportunity. The early Middle Ages are not a frozen world where nothing changes. They are a world moving slowly. Changes happen over generations rather than within a single lifetime. A village may look almost identical from one year to the next, yet over centuries roads change, settlements expand, and new customs develop. Sometimes history changes through ordinary people planting different crops, creating new tools, building new homes, or sharing knowledge with the next generation. People whose names were forgotten, but whose daily efforts shaped the world that came after them. The ordinary people of the early Middle Ages rarely appear in written records. History books often preserve the names of kings, warriors, bishops, and important leaders. Their decisions are recorded because they influenced large territories and major events. But the lives of farmers, craftsmen, and village families are usually found only indirectly through archaeological discoveries, old laws, religious documents, and the remains of the places where they lived. A simple wooden house may not carry a person's name. A handmade tool may not reveal the identity of its owner. A piece of pottery may not tell us who shaped it. Yet these objects are evidence of millions of human stories. They show that ordinary people built homes, prepared meals, raised children, created communities, and adapted to a changing world. Archaeologists studying medieval villages often discover the remains of everyday life. They find foundations of houses, storage pits, farming tools, cooking equipment, animal bones, and fragments of clothing. These discoveries allow historians to understand how people lived beyond the stories of powerful individuals. A small piece of evidence can reveal a great deal. The remains of a fireplace can show how a family heated their home. The position of animal shelters can reveal how villages were organized. The types of seeds found at old settlements can tell historians what crops people grew. Even waste provides information. Broken pottery, discarded tools, and food remains help reconstruct the habits of communities that disappeared many centuries ago. The medieval landscape itself carries memories of the people who lived there. Old field boundaries, ancient roads, and village locations sometimes continue to influence modern landscapes. In some places, paths created by medieval communities are still used today. The past is not always completely gone. It remains hidden beneath the surface. One of the most important parts of medieval life is the relationship between humans and the church. Religion influences almost every aspect of society during the early Middle Ages. For many people, faith provides explanations for the natural world, comfort during difficult moments, and a sense of connection with a larger community. The church is present from birth to death, Religious ceremonies mark important stages of life. Birth, marriage, illness, and burial are often connected to religious traditions. For many medieval people, the spiritual world and the physical world are not separate. A successful harvest may be seen as a blessing. A disaster may be interpreted through religious beliefs. A prayer may be considered a source of protection. This worldview shapes how people understand their place in the world. Church buildings also become important centers of communities. In small villages, a church may be one of the most recognizable structures. It serves not only as a place of worship, but also as a gathering point where people meet and share information. Religious leaders may be among the few educated people in a region. Because reading and writing are limited skills, priests, monks, and other religious figures often become responsible for recording information, maintaining documents, and preserving knowledge. Monasteries have an especially important role. A monastery is not simply a place where monks live in isolation. Many monasteries function as centers of agriculture, education, and craftsmanship. Monks grow crops, produce food, create manuscripts, and maintain libraries containing important texts. Inside a monastery, life follows a strict routine. The day is divided between prayer, work, study, and rest. Monks wake early, sometimes before sunrise, for religious services. They spend hours copying texts by hand, working in gardens, preparing food, or managing the needs of the community. The work of copying manuscripts requires extraordinary patience. A single book may take months or even years to complete. The materials are expensive. Parchment, made from animal skins, requires careful preparation. Ink must be produced using traditional methods. Every letter must be written by hand with precision. A mistake cannot simply be corrected by pressing a button. A damaged page may require hours of repair. Because of this, books are valuable objects. They are not common possessions. A small library may represent generations of effort. Through these manuscripts, knowledge from earlier civilizations survives. Religious texts, ancient writings, medical knowledge, historical accounts, and philosophical works are preserved by people who dedicate their lives to copying and protecting them. The quiet work of these scribes has a lasting impact. While many political events disappear with time, the books preserved in monasteries continue to provide information centuries later. Knowledge survives because someone carefully wrote it down. Education outside religious communities is much more limited. Most children do not attend schools in the modern sense. Their education is practical. They learn how to survive. They learn how to work. They learn the customs and responsibilities of their community. Formal education is usually available only to a small part of society, particularly members of religious institutions or wealthy families. However, intelligence and knowledge exist everywhere. A farmer who understands the behavior of crops possesses valuable knowledge. A craftsperson who can create a strong tool possesses specialized knowledge. A healer who understands plants possesses practical medical knowledge. Learning does not only happen through books. Much of medieval knowledge exists through experience. It is stored in memories, techniques, and traditions. This creates a different relationship with knowledge compared to the modern world. Today, information can be accessed instantly. In the early Middle Ages, knowledge is something carried by people. A skilled person is valuable because they hold information that cannot easily be replaced. If a master craftsman dies without teaching an apprentice, certain techniques may disappear. If a local tradition is forgotten, a community may lose part of its identity. And this continuous passing of knowledge is one of the quiet forces that keeps medieval society alive. Every generation inherits a world created by those who came before them. A farmer inherits knowledge about the land. A craftsperson inherits techniques developed over many years. A family inherits stories, customs, and traditions. Nothing exists completely on its own. Every part of medieval life is connected to the experiences of previous generations. This connection between past and present is especially visible in agriculture. Farming methods are not created by a single person. They develop slowly through centuries of observation and adaptation. Each generation makes small improvements based on what they have learned. A farmer may not leave behind a written record of their methods, but their knowledge continues through the people they teach. The same is true for animal care. Understanding animals requires patience and attention. People learn how to recognize signs of illness, how to protect livestock during harsh weather, and how to encourage healthy growth. A person who spends their entire life caring for animals develops a relationship with them based on experience. They understand small changes. A different sound from a cow, a change in the behavior of sheep, a sign that a horse is injured. These details can determine whether animals survive or become lost. In a society where animals are essential resources, this knowledge has great value. The same attention is given to plants. Medieval communities depend on understanding what grows, where it grows, and when it should be collected. Gardens near homes provide herbs, vegetables, and plants used for food and traditional medicine. A small garden may contain many useful plants. Some are used for cooking. Some are used to create dyes for clothing. Some are believed to help treat illness. Knowledge of plants is often passed through families, especially among those responsible for preparing food and caring for the sick. Medicine in the early Middle Ages is very different from modern medicine. People do not understand many diseases in the scientific way we do today. There are no modern hospitals, advanced surgeries, or knowledge of bacteria and viruses. However, people are not completely without medical knowledge. They understand injuries. They understand basic treatments. They use plants, minerals, and traditional methods that have been passed down through generations. Healing is often connected to both practical experience and religious belief. A person with a wound may receive care from someone who knows how to clean and protect injuries. At the same time, prayers or religious rituals may also be part of the healing process. The body and the spiritual world are often viewed together. Illness is one of the greatest challenges of medieval life. A simple infection that is easily treated today can become dangerous. Injuries from farming accidents, animal attacks, or everyday activities may have serious consequences. Because medical resources are limited, prevention is extremely important. People learn to avoid unnecessary risks. They maintain tools carefully. They protect food supplies. They try to keep living spaces clean according to the standards of their time. Cleanliness in medieval communities is often misunderstood. Although people do not have modern ideas about hygiene, they do understand the importance of cleanliness in certain areas. They wash themselves, clean clothing, maintain homes, and remove waste from living spaces. Practices vary greatly depending on location and social position. A wealthy household may have different opportunities than a poor farming family. A large town may face different challenges from a small village. Medieval life is not one single experience. It changes depending on where a person lives. Geography influences almost everything. A coastal community experiences the world differently from an inland farming village. People living near the sea may depend on fishing, shipbuilding, and maritime trade. Their diets may include more fish, and their knowledge may focus on tides, weather, and navigation. A mountain community faces different conditions. Travel is harder. Farming opportunities are limited. Animals may be more important than crops. People adapt to steep landscapes, colder temperatures, and isolation. A forest settlement has its own challenges and opportunities. Wood becomes a major resource. Hunting and gathering become more important. People learn the paths, plants, and animals of the surrounding wilderness. The early Middle Ages are therefore a collection of many different worlds. There is no single medieval experience. The daily life of a person living in a small village in Northern Europe is not identical to someone living near the Mediterranean coast. Their homes, food, clothing, traditions, and challenges may all be different. These common experiences create a shared foundation across much of medieval Europe. People lived with fewer possessions than modern societies. They had fewer comforts. They faced dangers that many people today rarely experience. But they also lived with a strong awareness of their surroundings. They noticed the changing seasons. They understood the sources of their food. They knew the people who produced the objects they used. Their world was smaller, but it was deeply connected. A loaf of bread was not simply a product purchased from a store. It represented the farmer who grew the grain, the worker who harvested it, the miller who turned it into flour, and the baker who prepared it. A piece of clothing was not simply fabric. It represented animals, plants, skilled hands, and many hours of work. Almost everything carried a visible history. Nothing was truly separate from the process that created it. This connection between people and the things around them shaped the entire medieval experience. And as the centuries continued, these small communities would slowly transform. Villages would become towns. Markets would expand. New kingdoms would rise. New technologies would appear. But the foundations created during the early Middle Ages would continue to influence European society for generations. But the foundations created during the early Middle Ages would continue to influence European society for generations. The transformation of medieval society does not happen suddenly. There is no single morning when the old world disappears and a new one begins. Change arrives slowly, through thousands of small decisions made by ordinary people. A new farming method is adopted in one village. A trade route becomes more active. A settlement grows near a river. A craftsman develops a better technique. Over time, these small changes reshape the world. For people living through these changes, the transformation is almost impossible to notice. A person born at the beginning of the early Middle Ages may see many familiar things throughout their life. The same fields are planted. The same animals are raised. The same seasonal celebrations return each year. Yet beyond their immediate surroundings, the larger world is gradually changing. One of the most important changes is the growth of local settlements. Many early medieval villages begin as small groups of families living near farmland. Over generations, some of these settlements become larger because more people gather around places that provide advantages. A reliable water source, fertile land, a road connecting different regions, a market where goods can be exchanged, a religious center that attracts visitors. These locations slowly become more important. A small gathering of homes can eventually become a town. The growth of towns changes the rhythm of life. In a village, most people are connected to agriculture. In towns, different professions become more visible. There are more specialized workers. A person may spend their entire life creating a particular type of product. A blacksmith may focus only on metalwork. A leather worker may specialize in preparing hides. A baker may produce bread for many families. A trader may travel between different regions. Specialization allows communities to produce more than they could when every household had to create everything by itself. Trade becomes increasingly important. Although many people still produce most of what they need locally, connections between regions become stronger over time. A farmer may exchange grain for tools. A craftsman may exchange products for food. A merchant may carry valuable goods between distant markets. Trade creates relationships between communities that may never meet directly. A piece of cloth sold in one town may have traveled through the hands of many people before reaching its final owner. The movement of goods also spreads ideas. Travelers bring more than objects. They carry stories, languages, customs, technologies, and information. A merchant returning from another region may describe unfamiliar buildings, different farming methods, or new products. A traveler may introduce people to ideas they have never encountered before. In this way, roads become pathways not only for goods, but also for knowledge. However, travel remains difficult and uncertain. A journey requires preparation. Travelers must consider weather, food supplies, safety, and places to rest. Inns and guest houses exist in some areas, but many travelers depend on hospitality from religious institutions or local communities. The medieval traveler moves through a world where distance feels much greater than it does today. A journey of 100 miles is not a simple trip. It is an experience. The traveler sees changing landscapes, different communities, and unfamiliar customs. For many people, travel is rare enough that a visitor from another region can become a source of great interest. A stranger arriving in a village may bring news of places most residents will never see. The stories of travelers help expand the imagination of medieval communities. They hear about distant kingdoms. They hear about powerful rulers. They hear about cities filled with thousands of people. Some stories are accurate. Others become exaggerated as they are repeated from person to person. but all of them contribute to the way medieval people understand the wider world. Maps from this period reflect this different understanding of geography. Unlike modern maps based on precise measurements, many medieval maps combine geographical information with religious and cultural ideas. The world is not always represented only as a physical space. It is also represented as a place filled with meaning. This reflects a broader difference between medieval and modern thinking. People of the early Middle Ages often understand events through a combination of observation, tradition, and belief. The natural world is studied through experience, but it is also interpreted through spiritual ideas. A storm is both a weather event and something that may carry deeper meaning. A successful harvest is both the result of hard work and a reason for gratitude. A person's life is connected to both the physical world and the spiritual world. This way of thinking influences everyday decisions. Planting, building, traveling, and celebrating are all connected to traditions that have existed for generations. Tradition provides stability in an uncertain world. When people do not have access to rapid information or advanced technology, familiar customs offer guidance. They provide answers to questions about how life should be organized. How should a marriage be arranged? How should a funeral be performed? How should land be divided? How should conflicts be resolved? Communities rely on customs because those customs have been tested over time. The past is not simply remembered. It is used as a guide for the present. This respect for tradition is one reason medieval societies can remain stable despite constant challenges. People face disease, difficult weather, conflicts, and economic uncertainty. Yet communities continue because individuals understand their responsibilities and depend on one another. The early Middle Ages are therefore not only a period of hardship, they are also a period of adaptation. People create solutions with the resources available to them. As the medieval world continues to develop, one of the most important parts of daily life remains the relationship between people and power. For ordinary villagers, rulers are often distant figures. A king may rule over a vast territory, but most farmers will never see him. Their direct interactions are usually with local authorities, landowners, religious leaders, or officials responsible for collecting obligations. Power is experienced locally. A person may know the lord who controls the nearby estate. They may know the priest who leads their church. They may know the village elder who helps solve disputes. These are the people who influence everyday decisions. The larger political world exists above them, but local relationships determine much of daily life. Landowners hold significant influence because land represents wealth and security. A noble family with control over large areas can provide protection, organize labor, and collect resources from the people living on those lands. In return, the people working the land receive access to fields, housing, and a degree of stability. This relationship is complex. It provides order, but it also creates obligations. A farmer may spend certain days working directly on the Lord's land. They may provide part of their harvest. They may help maintain roads, buildings, or defensive structures. These responsibilities are part of the social structure that develops throughout medieval Europe. For many villagers, freedom is understood differently than it is today. Modern ideas about personal independence are not the same as those of the early Middle Ages. A person's security often comes from belonging to a community and having established relationships rather than from complete independence. Being connected to others provides protection. A person alone has limited resources. A person within a village has neighbors who can help during difficult times. This does not mean medieval society is without inequality. Social differences are clear. Some people possess land, wealth, and influence, while others have very few possessions beyond their tools and clothing. The opportunities available to a person are strongly affected by their birth, family, and position within society. However, medieval communities are not simply divided into powerful and powerless individuals. Many groups contribute to society in different ways. Farmers produce food. Craftsmen create necessary objects. Merchants connect regions. Religious communities preserve knowledge. Warriors provide military protection. Each group has a role within the larger structure. The importance of food production cannot be overstated. Agriculture supports every other activity. A castle, a monastery, or a growing town cannot exist without a reliable supply of food from the countryside. The labor of farmers creates the foundation upon which the rest of society depends. Despite this importance, farming remains one of the most physically demanding occupations. A farmer works with limited tools and depends heavily on weather conditions. A single person must understand soil, seasons, animals, and countless small details that influence production. The success of farming depends on patience. A field cannot be forced to produce faster. A crop cannot be protected from every danger. A bad year cannot always be prevented. This creates a culture of preparation. People store what they can. They save seeds. They preserve food. They repair tools before they break completely. They prepare for problems before those problems arrive. This habit of preparation extends into every part of medieval life. A family does not wait until winter begins to search for firewood. A craftsman does not wait until a tool completely fails before maintaining it. A community does not wait until a disaster happens before creating relationships of support. Survival depends on thinking ahead. Another important part of medieval society is the movement of people through marriage. Marriage is not only a personal relationship. It is also an economic and social connection between families. For many people, marriage influences property, labor, and relationships between households. The traditions surrounding marriage vary greatly depending on social position. Among ordinary villagers, marriage is often connected to practical needs. A household requires cooperation. Two adults working together can manage land, animals, children, and daily responsibilities more effectively. Family life is therefore closely connected to survival. Children are important members of the household because they represent both the future of the family and additional help with daily tasks. Childbirth, however, carries significant risks. Without modern medical knowledge, pregnancy and early childhood are dangerous periods. Families often experience loss, and communities develop traditions around birth, naming, and protection. Despite these difficulties, medieval families value children deeply. Children represent continuity. They carry family names, traditions, skills, and memories into the future. Growing up in the early Middle Ages means becoming part of a long chain of generations. A child learns the same paths walked by parents and grandparents. They inherit knowledge from people they may never have met. They continue practices that began long before their own lifetime. This connection between generations is one of the defining features of medieval life. The past is always present. Old buildings, ancient customs, family stories, and traditional ways of working all remind people that they are part of something larger than themselves. For a modern observer, the early Middle Ages may seem slow and limited. But for the people living within that world, life is filled with responsibilities, relationships, and constant adaptation. They are not simply waiting for history to happen. They are creating it through ordinary actions repeated every day. They are creating it through ordinary actions repeated every day. The daily routines of the early Middle Ages may appear simple when viewed from the distance of many centuries, but those routines require a deep understanding of survival. Every action has a purpose. Every season brings a responsibility. Every person contributes to the continuation of the community. One of the most important responsibilities in medieval households is managing limited resources. Nothing is unlimited. Food, fuel, clothing, and tools all require careful attention. A family must constantly make decisions about how resources are used. A larger meal today may mean less food available later. More firewood used during one cold night means less available at the end of winter. This careful management becomes a natural part of life. People learn to think about the future because the future cannot be easily controlled. A sudden illness, a damaged roof, or a failed harvest can quickly change a family's situation. Having extra supplies and strong relationships can make the difference between surviving a difficult period and facing serious hardship. Storage areas become essential parts of medieval homes. Grain, dried foods, tools, and valuable items are protected carefully. Many homes include underground storage spaces or separate structures designed to keep supplies safe. The location and design of storage can be just as important as production itself. Growing food is only one part of survival. Keeping it available throughout the year is another challenge. The importance of grain is especially clear. Cereals such as wheat, barley, and rye form the basis of many diets across medieval Europe. Grain can be stored longer than many other foods and transformed into bread, porridge, or other meals. Bread is more than a food. It represents security. A household with enough grain has a better chance of surviving winter. A shortage of grain can affect entire regions. For this reason, grain storage and distribution become important concerns for both communities and rulers. The production of bread itself requires several stages. The grain must first be harvested. Then it must be separated from the unwanted parts of the plant. After that, it must be ground into flour. Finally, the flour must be mixed with water and prepared for baking. Each stage requires time and effort. Mills become important locations because grinding grain by hand is slow and physically demanding. Water mills and windmills, where available, help increase production and reduce some of the labor required. The development of milling technology represents one of the gradual improvements that change medieval life over time. Technology in the early Middle Ages is often misunderstood. People sometimes imagine a period without innovation, but medieval communities constantly develop practical solutions. Their technology is not based on modern machines, but it is based on careful observation and improvement. Better farming tools, more effective building methods, improved methods of preserving food, stronger ships, more efficient mills. Small improvements accumulate over generations. One of the clearest examples of medieval adaptation is the way people build according to their environment. Homes in different regions reflect local conditions. In areas with heavy rainfall, roofs must be designed to remove water effectively. In colder regions, buildings require better protection from wind and cold. Near forests, wood becomes the primary material. In areas with available stone construction becomes more common. Medieval builders work with what nature provides. Their buildings may appear simple, but they often demonstrate practical knowledge developed over many generations. The construction of larger structures requires even greater organization. Castles, monasteries, churches, and bridges require many workers with different skills. Stonecutters, carpenters, metalworkers, and laborers all contribute. A large building project can continue for years or even decades. For the people living nearby, such projects become part of the landscape of their entire lives. A person may see a church begin construction during childhood and watch it finally completed when they are elderly. These structures become symbols of patience and collective effort. Religious buildings especially hold great importance. Beyond their spiritual role, churches and monasteries become places where communities gather and where knowledge is preserved. They represent stability in a changing world. The village church often becomes one of the few permanent landmarks in a community. Around it, people organize important moments of life. Births are recognized. Marriages are celebrated. The dead are remembered. The passing of generations is marked. In this way, religious spaces become connected with personal memories. A person may walk past the same building throughout their entire life and associate it with countless experiences. The sound of bells, the sight of the building, and the traditions connected to it become part of the identity of the community. For medieval people, identity is strongly connected to place. A person is not only an individual. They are a member of a family, a resident of a village, a worker in a particular occupation, a participant in local traditions. These connections create a strong sense of belonging. However, belonging also means responsibility. A person is expected to contribute. A farmer must maintain their fields. A craftsman must produce quality work. A parent must teach the next generation. A neighbor must participate in community life. The survival of the group depends on the actions of individuals. This balance between personal responsibility and community dependence is one of the defining features of medieval society. People live in a world where cooperation is not simply helpful. It is necessary. The challenges of the early Middle Ages cannot be solved alone. A person needs others. A family needs neighbors. A village needs cooperation, and a society needs the combined efforts of countless ordinary people whose names history rarely records. And a society needs the combined efforts of countless ordinary people whose names history rarely records. Although their names have disappeared, their presence remains visible through the world they created. The fields they cultivated shaped landscapes that still exist today. The roads they traveled influenced later routes. The traditions they followed became part of the cultural foundations of Europe. Their work was quiet, but it was continuous. The early Middle Ages were built through repetition. A farmer planting seeds every spring. A craftsperson repairing tools. A family preparing food. A monk copying a manuscript. A builder raising walls one stone at a time. Each action may have seemed small to the person performing it, but together these actions created lasting changes. One of the most important aspects of medieval life was the relationship between work and time. Modern societies often separate time into precise units. Hours, minutes, and schedules organize daily activities. In the early Middle Ages, time is experienced differently. Nature creates the rhythm, the position of the sun, the length of daylight, the changing seasons, the cycles of farming. These determine when people work and when they rest. A farmer does not need to know the exact hour to understand what must be done. The appearance of morning light signals the beginning of activity. The position of the sun helps measure the progress of the day. The arrival of darkness signals the end of outdoor work. This relationship with time creates a slower but highly organized way of living. Every season has its own responsibilities. Every month has its own expectations. People understand the year through events rather than numbers. The beginning of planting, the first harvest, the arrival of winter, the return of spring. These moments become markers in memory. The medieval year is also shaped by religious celebrations. Festivals provide breaks from ordinary labor and create opportunities for communities to gather. During these occasions, people may prepare special foods, attend religious ceremonies, visit nearby settlements, and spend time with relatives. These celebrations are important because they interrupt the repetitive nature of daily work. They create moments of joy and connection. Even people living difficult lives find ways to celebrate. Human beings do not only survive through food and shelter. They also need meaning, relationships, and shared experiences. Music, stories, and traditions provide these connections. A song sung during work can make a long task feel easier. A story told during winter evenings can connect younger generations with the past. A celebration can remind people that they are part of a larger community. The spoken word remains one of the strongest forms of communication. Most people cannot write, but they can remember. Stories are carefully repeated because memory preserves knowledge. A tale about ancestors may explain family origins. A traditional song may describe important events. A local story may teach younger people about dangers or responsibilities. In this way, oral traditions act as living records. They carry information through time. However, not all stories remain unchanged. As they pass from person to person, details may be added, removed, or transformed. A simple event may become larger through repeated telling. This is one reason historians must carefully study medieval sources. The medieval world contains both recorded history and remembered tradition. Separating fact from interpretation requires careful investigation. Written sources from the early Middle Ages are limited, but they provide valuable information. Religious texts, legal documents, letters, and chronicles reveal parts of medieval life. However, these sources often focus on powerful individuals rather than ordinary people. A document may describe a king's decision, but say little about the farmers who produced the food supporting that kingdom. This creates a challenge for historians. To understand everyday life, they must combine different types of evidence. Written records, archaeological discoveries, buildings, tools, burial sites, environmental evidence. Together, these sources create a clearer picture of the past. They reveal that medieval society was not simply a world of castles and battles. It was a world of farms, workshops, markets, homes, and communities. The majority of medieval people never participated in famous historical events. They did not command armies. They did not rule kingdoms. They did not appear in royal records. Yet without their work, kingdoms could not exist. Armies required food. Cities required supplies. Rulers required resources. Every major achievement depended on the labor of ordinary people. This relationship between the powerful and the ordinary is one of the central realities of medieval society. A king might be remembered for winning a battle, but thousands of unnamed people made that victory possible. Farmers produced the food. Craftsmen created equipment. Workers maintained roads. Communities supported the economy. History is often written around dramatic moments, but everyday life provides the foundation beneath those moments. The early Middle Ages are therefore best understood not only through rulers and conflicts, but through ordinary routines. The sound of tools striking wood, the movement of animals through village paths, the smell of bread baking near a fire, the quiet work of someone spinning wool, the conversation of families gathered after sunset. These details reveal a world that was slower than ours, but filled with constant activity. A world where survival required attention. A world where knowledge was carried by human hands. A world where every generation inherited the work of the previous one and passed it forward. And slowly, over many centuries, these countless ordinary actions transformed the early Middle Ages into the medieval world that would become familiar in later history. And slowly, over many centuries, these countless ordinary actions transformed the early Middle Ages into the medieval world that would become familiar in later history. The medieval world does not appear fully formed. It grows gradually from the foundations created by earlier generations. Villages become more organized. Trade routes become more active. Political structures become stronger. New technologies spread from one community to another. But beneath all of these changes, ordinary life continues to follow familiar patterns. The relationship between people and the land remains one of the strongest connections in medieval society. For most people, the landscape is not simply the place where they live. It is a source of identity. A person knows the fields around their home, the forests beyond them, the rivers that provide water, and the paths connecting nearby settlements. These places are connected to memories and experiences. A field is not only a piece of land. It may be the place where a family has worked for generations. A forest is not only a collection of trees. It may be where people gathered fuel, food, and materials throughout their lives. A river is not only a source of water. It may be the place where communities meet, travel, and trade. The environment shapes human experience. This close relationship with nature also creates a deep awareness of change. People notice small differences. A warmer winter, a later spring, a weaker harvest, an unusual number of animals. These observations become valuable knowledge because survival depends on understanding the environment. The medieval farmer is not simply working mechanically. They are constantly observing. They watch the sky before storms. They examine the soil before planting. They pay attention to the condition of animals. They remember what happened in previous years. Experience becomes a form of knowledge. One of the greatest challenges faced by medieval communities is uncertainty. There are many things people cannot control. Disease can appear suddenly. Weather can destroy crops. Conflicts can interrupt trade. A family can lose important members through illness or accidents. Because uncertainty is always present, medieval people developed strong traditions of preparation and cooperation. The community becomes a form of protection. A person who belongs to a supportive village has advantages that someone alone does not have. Neighbors can share labor. Families can exchange resources. Communities can organize responses to problems. This cooperation is not based only on kindness. It is also based on necessity. The survival of one household often affects the survival of others. A village where many families fail will struggle to continue. A village where people support each other has a better chance of enduring difficult periods. This connection between individuals and communities shapes medieval ideas about responsibility. People are expected to contribute. A person who refuses to help others may damage relationships that are essential for survival. At the same time, Communities also provide security and belonging. This creates a balance between personal duty and collective support. The same principle can be seen in medieval crafts. A skilled craftsperson does not develop their abilities alone. They learn from someone before them. A young apprentice spends years observing a master. They begin with simple tasks: cleaning materials, preparing tools, assisting with basic work. Slowly, they learn more advanced skills. This process ensures that knowledge continues. A craft tradition may survive for centuries because each generation teaches the next. The same is true for farming techniques. A farmer learns from parents and grandparents. They inherit methods developed through generations of trial and experience. They may never know the names of the people who first developed these methods, but they continue using knowledge created long before their own lifetime. This passing of knowledge is one of the quiet achievements of medieval society. The early Middle Ages also see the gradual development of stronger political communities. After the collapse of Roman authority in many regions, new kingdoms and local powers emerge. These kingdoms are often unstable at first. Borders change. Rulers compete. Different groups seek influence. For ordinary people, these changes can create uncertainty. A village may belong to one ruler during one period and another ruler later. However, many daily activities continue despite political changes. The farmer still needs to plant crops. The craftsman still needs to produce goods. The family still needs to prepare for winter. This shows an important reality of history. Political events and everyday life do not always move at the same speed. A kingdom can rise or fall, while ordinary people continue their routines. Of course, major events can still have consequences. A war may bring soldiers through farmland. A change in leadership may alter taxes or obligations. A new trade connection may create economic opportunities. But for many people, history is experienced through small changes rather than dramatic moments. A new tool, a different farming method, a larger market, a new neighbor, a changing landscape. These are the changes that shape daily experience. Over time, these small developments accumulate. The world of the early Middle Ages slowly becomes more connected. Roads become busier. Markets become larger. Towns become more important. Written knowledge becomes more widespread. The foundations of later medieval society begin to appear. Yet even as society changes, one thing remains constant. The lives of ordinary people continue to depend on the same basic needs: food, shelter, family, community, security, meaning. These needs connect medieval people with every generation that came before and after them. Their world may seem distant, but their experiences remain familiar. They worried about the future. They cared for their families. They worked for a better life. They hoped for good fortune. They faced difficulties and continued forward. And this quiet persistence is one of the most important stories of the early Middle Ages. And this quiet persistence is one of the most important stories of the early Middle Ages. The story of medieval life is not only a story of survival. It is also a story of adaptation. People constantly adjusted to the conditions around them. They changed their methods when circumstances changed. They improved their tools when new ideas became available. They created solutions using the materials and knowledge they had. This ability to adapt allowed communities to continue through uncertain centuries. One example of this adaptation can be seen in farming practices. The land that feeds a community must be carefully managed. If farmers repeatedly use the same fields without allowing the soil to recover, production can decline. Over time, communities develop different methods to maintain the productivity of their land. Some areas use systems where fields are divided and planted differently each year. Other regions rely on local traditions developed according to their environment. These methods are not perfect, but they represent generations of observation. A medieval farmer understands something important. The land must be cared for if it is expected to provide for the future. This idea extends beyond farming. A forest cannot be endlessly cut without consequences. Animals cannot be hunted without limits. Tools cannot be replaced constantly. Resources must be respected because communities depend on them. The concept of long-term planning is built into daily life. People think about next year while working today. When a farmer saves seeds from a harvest, they are preparing for the future. When a family repairs clothing instead of replacing it, they are protecting resources. When a craftsman teaches an apprentice, they are ensuring knowledge continues. The future is always connected to the present. This connection is especially important during difficult periods. The early Middle Ages experienced many challenges, including disease outbreaks, political conflicts, and periods of economic instability. However, these difficulties do not define every moment of life. People still experience happiness. They still form friendships. They still celebrate important moments. They still create beauty. The medieval world is not only a place of hardship. It is also a world of creativity. Craftspeople create objects that are both useful and artistic. Woodworkers carve designs into everyday items. Metalworkers create detailed decorations on tools and weapons. Textile workers produce patterns and colors that reflect local traditions. Even simple objects can contain remarkable skill. A wooden bowl may have been shaped by someone who spent decades understanding the nature of different types of wood. A piece of cloth may represent countless hours of preparation and craftsmanship. The beauty of medieval objects often comes from the care involved in creating them. Because objects are difficult to produce, people value them. A handmade item carries the effort of the person who created it. This creates a different relationship between people and possessions. In modern societies, objects can often be replaced quickly. In medieval communities, objects are usually maintained, repaired, and valued for many years. A tool may remain in use across multiple generations. A piece of clothing may be passed from parent to child. A family object may become connected to memories and traditions. Possessions have stories. They represent time and effort. This relationship can also be seen in buildings. A home is not simply a structure. It is a place where generations live. A family may be born, grow older, and die within the same walls. The fireplace where meals are prepared may have warmed several generations. The doorway crossed by children may have been crossed by their grandparents many decades earlier. Buildings become witnesses to human life. They quietly hold memories. The same is true for villages. A medieval village is not only a collection of houses. It is a network of relationships. People know who lives nearby. They know family histories. They know traditions. They know which households have faced difficulties and which have provided help in the past. This knowledge creates a strong sense of community identity. However, community life also means limited privacy. In a small settlement, personal events are rarely completely private. Births, marriages, disagreements, illnesses, and successes are often known by others. A person's reputation becomes extremely important. Being trusted by neighbors is a valuable form of security. A respected person can receive support during difficult times. Someone who loses the trust of the community may face isolation. Social connections are therefore not only emotional. They are practical. They directly influence a person's ability to survive. This explains why medieval societies place great importance on loyalty, responsibility, and reputation. A person's actions affect not only themselves, but also their family and community. The idea of individual identity is therefore different from modern understanding. People certainly have personal experiences and personalities, but they are strongly connected to groups around them. Family identity, village identity, religious identity, occupational identity. These connections shape how people understand their place in the world. A farmer is not simply someone who grows food. They are part of a tradition of farming. A craftsperson is not simply someone who creates objects. They are part of a chain of knowledge. A villager is not simply someone living in a location. They are part of a community with shared memories. This strong connection between individuals and society is one of the defining characteristics of the medieval world. As centuries pass, these communities will continue to change. New kingdoms will rise. Cities will become larger. But the foundations created by ordinary people will remain. The medieval world is built not only by those whose names appear in history books. It is built by those who worked quietly every day, those who planted fields, those who raised families, those who preserved knowledge, those who created communities. Their lives may seem ordinary, but without them, the history of Europe would be completely different. Their lives may seem ordinary, but without them, the history of Europe would be completely different. To understand daily life in the early Middle Ages, it is also important to look beyond work and survival. People were not only farmers, craftsmen, or laborers. They were parents, neighbors, friends, travelers, believers, and individuals with their own hopes and fears. Their personal lives reveal another side of the medieval world. One of the most important moments in a person's life was marriage. Marriage in the early Middle Ages was not understood in exactly the same way as it is in many modern societies. While personal feelings certainly existed, marriage was also connected to family relationships, property, labor, and social stability. For ordinary villagers, a household required cooperation. Running a farm was not the responsibility of one person alone. Growing food, caring for animals, preparing clothing, raising children, and maintaining a home required the combined efforts of several people. Because of this, marriage often represented the creation of a working partnership. The process of marriage varied depending on region, religion, and social position. Among wealthy families, marriage could involve agreements between households and discussions about property or political relationships. Among ordinary people, practical considerations often played a larger role. Could the couple support a household? Did they have access to land? Would their families be able to cooperate? These questions could be just as important as personal feelings. Wedding celebrations themselves could become major community events. Although the details differed across regions, weddings often included gatherings of relatives, shared meals, religious ceremonies, and traditions that connected the new couple with the wider community. Food played an important role. A wedding was one of the occasions when people could enjoy more abundant meals than usual. The preparation of special foods required cooperation from many members of the community. Neighbors might help prepare bread, meat, drinks, or decorations. A marriage was therefore not only the union of two individuals. It was an event that connected families and strengthened relationships between households. Family life continued after marriage, but raising children in the early Middle Ages was a challenging responsibility. Children were deeply valued, but childhood was very different from the modern experience. There were no schools for most children. There were no organized activities designed specifically for entertainment. Instead, children became part of the household economy from an early age. Young children learned by watching adults. They learned how food was prepared. They learned how animals were cared for. They learned how tools were used. They learned the customs of their community. Education happened naturally through participation. A child growing up on a farm slowly became familiar with every part of rural life. They learned which plants were useful. They learned how weather affected crops. They learned how to recognize animals and their behavior. By the time they reached adulthood, they carried years of practical knowledge. However, childhood was not only about work. Children still played. They created games using simple objects around them. A piece of wood could become a toy. A small stone could become part of a game. Stories and imagination provided entertainment. Children created their own worlds within the limits of their environment. Their games often reflected the society around them. They copied adults. They imitated farming activities. They practiced skills they would later use. Play and preparation for adulthood were often connected. Another important part of early medieval life was health. Living conditions were challenging, and illness was a constant possibility. People understood the body through the knowledge available to them, which was very different from modern medicine. A fever, infection, or injury could become serious. A small wound could threaten a person's life. Because medical treatments were limited, prevention and experience were extremely important. People relied on traditional knowledge. Certain plants were used for remedies. Certain methods of caring for injuries were passed down through generations. Older members of communities often held valuable knowledge about treating common problems. Religious beliefs were also connected to healing. Many people believed that spiritual support was an important part of recovery. Prayers, blessings, and religious rituals could exist alongside practical treatments. For medieval people, physical and spiritual health were closely connected. Death was also a natural part of life that communities experienced regularly. Because illness and accidents were more common, people often encountered death at younger ages than people in modern societies. Funeral traditions helped communities deal with loss. The death of one person affected many others. A family lost a member. A village lost a neighbor. A community lost someone who had contributed to its daily life. Burial practices reflected both religious beliefs and local customs. The dead were remembered through ceremonies, prayers, and shared memories. Remembering ancestors was important because families understood themselves as part of a long chain connecting past generations with the future. Life and death were not viewed as separate events. They were parts of a continuous cycle. Birth brought a new member into the community. Growth brought new responsibilities. Marriage created new connections. Old age brought experience. Death marked the end of one person's journey, but also the continuation of family and tradition. The people of the early Middle Ages lived with a constant awareness of this cycle. Their world was temporary, but their communities continued. Every generation added something before passing knowledge to the next. Every generation added something before passing knowledge to the next. This constant movement from one generation to another shaped how medieval people viewed life itself. The individual was important, but the continuation of the family and community was often considered even more important. A person's actions were connected to those who came before and those who would come after. This way of thinking influenced many parts of daily life, including the way people understood age. Growing older was not simply a biological process. Age represented experience. An older person who had survived many winters, witnessed many harvests, and learned many skills possessed knowledge that younger people did not have. Elders often became important sources of advice. They remembered past events. They knew local traditions. They understood how the community had changed over time. In a society where written information was limited, memory itself became valuable. The elderly were often the living connection between the past and the present. However, old age was not always easy. Physical work throughout life could leave lasting effects on the body. Years of farming, carrying heavy materials, and performing difficult tasks could cause injuries and health problems. A person's ability to work often decreased with age. For this reason, family relationships became extremely important. Older members of households were usually cared for by relatives rather than separate institutions. The family remained the main source of support throughout life. The same was true for people who became unable to work because of illness or injury. Communities developed their own ways of supporting vulnerable members. Religious institutions sometimes provided assistance. Neighbors sometimes helped. Families carried much of the responsibility. The idea of organized social support as understood today did not exist in the same form, but compassion and cooperation were still important parts of community life. Another major part of everyday experience was clothing. Clothing was not only protection from the weather. It also communicated information about a person. The materials, colors, and quality of clothing could reveal social position, occupation, and wealth. Most ordinary people wore practical clothing designed for work. Durability was more important than appearance. A farmer needed clothing that could survive outdoor labor, changing weather, and repeated repairs. Wool was one of the most important materials in many regions. It provided warmth and could be produced locally. The process of creating wool clothing required many steps. First, sheep had to be cared for. Then the wool had to be collected. After cleaning and preparing the fibers, the wool was spun into thread. Finally, the thread was woven into cloth. Every stage required time and skill. The person wearing a wool garment was connected to many different activities and workers. A simple cloak represented animals, farmers, spinners, weavers, and craftspeople. Linen was another important material. Created from plant fibers, linen could be used for lighter clothing and household items. Producing linen also required significant effort. Plants had to be grown, processed, and transformed into usable fibers. Because fabric was difficult to create, clothing was treated as valuable. A torn garment was not immediately discarded. It was repaired. A larger piece of fabric might become a smaller garment. Older clothing might eventually become household material. Nothing was wasted easily. Colors also had meaning. Some dyes were simple and widely available. Others required rare materials and were more expensive. Bright or unusual colors could indicate wealth because producing them required additional resources. This made clothing one of the ways social differences became visible. The same was true for food. Although everyone needed to eat, diets varied greatly depending on wealth, location, and occupation. The meals of a noble household could be very different from those of a rural farming family. A wealthy table might include more meat, imported spices, and expensive products. A peasant household usually depended on local and seasonal foods. Grains were central. Bread, porridge, and simple grain-based meals provided much of the daily energy required for physical work. Vegetables such as onions, cabbage, beans, and peas were common in many regions. Dairy products provided additional nutrition where animals were available. Meat was often less common for ordinary people than many modern audiences imagine. Animals were valuable while alive. A cow provided milk. A sheep provided wool. A chicken produced eggs. Killing animals for meat meant losing future resources. Therefore, meat was often associated with special occasions, religious festivals, hunting success, or wealthier households. Fish could become important in communities near rivers or seas. Religious rules also influenced eating habits. Certain days required fasting or restrictions on particular foods. These traditions affected the rhythm of meals throughout the year. Food was not only about survival. It was connected to culture, religion, and social relationships. Sharing a meal created bonds between people. A guest welcomed into a home was often offered food because hospitality carried great importance. Refusing to provide basic hospitality could damage relationships and reputation. Travelers especially depended on the kindness of strangers. A person far from home could not always rely on inns or commercial services. Hospitality was not only a practical action. It was also connected to moral and religious values. Helping a traveler was seen as a responsibility. In a world where journeys were difficult and uncertain, this tradition allowed people to move between communities. The road was never completely empty. Farmers traveled to markets. Soldiers crossed territories. Each traveler carried pieces of the wider world into places that might otherwise remain isolated. Through these movements, ideas, goods, and stories slowly spread across medieval Europe. A village that seemed distant from major events could still be connected to a much larger network. Through roads, through rivers, through markets, through human relationships. These connections slowly transformed the early medieval world. Although most people spent their lives close to the place where they were born, the movement of certain individuals created links between distant communities. Merchants, religious travelers, craftsmen, and messengers carried information across regions that ordinary villagers might never visit. One of the most important groups involved in this movement was the merchant. Early medieval merchants lived a challenging life. Traveling with valuable goods was dangerous. Roads were often poor, weather conditions were unpredictable, and protection was limited. A merchant needed knowledge, courage, and strong relationships to succeed. A journey was not simply a movement from one place to another. It was a calculation of risks. Where could they rest? Which roads were safe? Which markets offered good opportunities? Where could goods be exchanged? Merchants needed to understand local customs because every region had its own traditions and expectations. A successful trader was not only someone who owned goods. They were someone who understood people. Markets became important meeting places where different parts of society came together. A farmer who produced extra grain might visit a market to exchange it. A craftsman might bring tools, clothing, or household objects. A merchant might arrive with items from distant places. The market was a place where information traveled as much as products. People learned about events in other regions. They heard rumors about rulers and conflicts. They discovered new goods and unfamiliar customs. For many villagers, the market was one of the few opportunities to encounter people from outside their immediate community. The sounds of a medieval market would have been very different from modern shopping areas. There were no electric lights, advertisements, or organized stores. Instead, markets were filled with human voices, sellers calling attention to their goods, buyers negotiating prices, animals moving through crowded spaces, craftsmen demonstrating their skills, the smell of food, smoke, leather, and wood mixing together. A medieval market was a sensory experience. It was noisy, crowded, and constantly changing. The size of markets varied greatly. Some were small gatherings held on specific days. Others grew into important commercial centers that attracted people from many regions. Over time, some towns became known for particular products. One place might become famous for textiles, another for metalwork, another for agricultural goods. Specialization encouraged trade and helped towns grow. Waterways were especially important for transportation. Rivers provided easier movement than many roads. A boat could carry large amounts of goods more efficiently than animals traveling on land. Communities near rivers often benefited from increased trade. Coastal regions had even wider connections. Ships allowed people to travel between distant lands, bringing foreign goods and ideas. However, medieval travel by sea was also dangerous. Ships depended heavily on weather conditions. Storms could destroy vessels. Navigation was difficult without modern equipment. Sailors relied on experience, observation, and knowledge passed down through generations. They studied winds, currents, coastlines, and the behavior of the sea. A skilled sailor possessed knowledge that could determine whether a journey succeeded or failed. Life near the sea created different communities. Fishing became an important occupation. People developed traditions connected to tides and seasons. Coastal villages often had a closer relationship with distant places because ships regularly arrived from other regions. A person living near a major port might encounter languages, foods, and customs from places they had never seen. Religion also encouraged movement. Pilgrimages were important journeys for many medieval people. A pilgrim traveled to a religious site seeking spiritual meaning, healing, forgiveness, or personal devotion. These journeys could be long and difficult. A person might walk for weeks or months. They faced exhaustion, unfamiliar environments, and uncertainty. Yet pilgrimage offered a powerful experience. It connected individuals to places considered sacred and introduced them to communities beyond their own. Pilgrims also contributed to cultural exchange. They carried stories from one region to another. They described different traditions. They brought news from distant places. Religious institutions often became important stops along pilgrimage routes. Monasteries and churches provided places where travelers could rest, receive assistance, and continue their journeys. These routes helped connect medieval society. A person living in a small village could still become part of a much larger world through travel and religious networks. Another important group of travelers was the messenger. In a world without instant communication, carrying information required physical movement. A message from one ruler to another might need to travel hundreds of kilometers. A letter from a monastery might take weeks to arrive. A warning about danger depended on someone carrying that information quickly. Messengers were essential because information itself had power. A ruler needed news about distant territories. A military leader needed reports from the battlefield. A religious institution needed communication between different communities. The speed of information was limited by the speed of people and animals. This meant that distance had a completely different meaning in the early Middle Ages. A decision made in one location might take a very long time to affect another region. Events unfolded slowly. News arrived slowly. Changes happened slowly. For modern people used to instant communication, this can be difficult to imagine. A person in the early Middle Ages could wake up one morning without knowing about a major event that had happened hundreds of kilometers away. They lived within a much smaller information world. Yet within that smaller world, people developed their own ways of staying connected. The medieval world was not silent. It was simply moving at a different speed. This slower movement of information shaped the way people understood time, distance, and events. For a person living in the early Middle Ages, the world beyond the nearby region often existed through stories. A traveler arriving from another area could bring information that people had never heard before. A merchant could describe foreign cities. A soldier returning from conflict could tell stories of distant lands. A religious traveler could share experiences from places considered sacred. Stories were one of the main ways people imagined the wider world. But stories were not only entertainment. They also carried lessons, warnings, and memories. A tale about a dangerous road could help future travelers. A story about a great ruler could influence ideas about leadership. A legend about ancestors could strengthen family identity. The spoken word had great importance because memory preserved what writing could not. In villages where few people could read, the ability to remember and tell stories was a valuable skill. Some individuals became respected because of their knowledge of traditions, histories, and important events. They were the people who carried the memory of the community. The evening hours were especially important for storytelling. After the day's work was finished and darkness arrived, families gathered around fires. The fire was not only a source of warmth. It was the center of household life. People cooked near it. They repaired tools near it. They shared stories near it. During long winter evenings, the fire became a place where generations interacted. Older people could share memories with younger family members. Children could learn traditions. Communities could preserve their identity. The atmosphere of these gatherings was very different from modern entertainment. There were no screens, recorded music, or digital communication. Entertainment came from human creativity. Stories, songs, conversation, games, craftsmanship. People created their own forms of amusement using what they had available. Music was an important part of medieval culture. Different regions developed their own instruments and traditions. Simple instruments could be made from available materials. Wood, animal skins, and strings could be transformed into objects capable of creating music. Songs accompanied many activities. Some songs helped people work together. Others celebrated important events. Others preserved stories about the past. Music allowed people to express emotions and create shared experiences. Celebrations also provided opportunities for music and gathering. Religious festivals, weddings, seasonal events, and community gatherings created moments when ordinary routines changed. Food became more abundant. People wore their better clothing. Communities came together. For a short time, the pressures of daily labor became less intense. These events were important because medieval life contained many responsibilities. Celebrations created balance. They reminded people that life was not only about work. Another important part of medieval society was the role of games and competition. Although survival required serious effort, people still found ways to enjoy themselves. Physical competitions could test strength and skill. Children created simple games. Adults participated in activities connected to social gatherings. Among warriors and nobles, competitions involving combat skills became especially important. Training and competition prepared warriors while also providing entertainment. However, ordinary villagers also had their own forms of recreation. A community gathering could include contests, dancing, music, and storytelling. The idea that people in the past had no time for enjoyment is inaccurate. Even during difficult periods, humans searched for moments of happiness. Another area where medieval life differed greatly from modern life was sleep. Sleep patterns were closely connected to the environment. Without electric lighting, darkness strongly influenced daily routines. After sunset, activities became more limited. Candles and lamps existed, but they were valuable and did not provide the same level of illumination as modern lighting. For many ordinary people, the evening naturally became a quieter period. The household gathered. Work slowed down. People prepared for rest. The length of sleep could change depending on the season. Long winter nights provided more time indoors. Summer nights offered fewer hours of darkness. The rhythm of sleep followed nature rather than artificial schedules. The sleeping arrangements of medieval households also differed from modern expectations. Privacy was limited. Large families often shared living spaces. Beds and sleeping areas were practical rather than luxurious. Many people slept on simple mattresses filled with materials such as straw or other natural materials. The quality of sleep depended greatly on social position. A wealthy household could have more comfortable furniture, better protection from cold, and more private spaces. An ordinary family had fewer comforts. Yet people adapted to these conditions because they were normal parts of their world. The home itself was usually a multifunctional space. A medieval house was not divided into many specialized rooms like modern homes. One area could serve several purposes: eating, working, resting, socializing. The arrangement depended on the size and wealth of the household. In smaller homes, daily life happened within a single main space. The sounds and smells of life were always present. The preparation of food, the movement of animals, the repair of tools, the conversations of family members. The home was a place of constant activity. It was not simply a private shelter. It was the center of economic and social life. This close connection between work and home shaped the entire medieval experience. A person's occupation was often visible around them. A farmer's home contained agricultural tools. A craftsperson's home contained materials and equipment. A merchant's home contained goods connected to trade. The separation between personal life and working life was much smaller than in many modern societies. And through these ordinary details, the world of the early Middle Ages becomes easier to understand. To truly understand medieval daily life, it is necessary to imagine not only what people did, but also what they experienced through their senses. The medieval world had a different atmosphere. The sounds, smells, and textures of everyday life were shaped by natural materials, animals, weather, and human activity. A village morning did not begin with machines or traffic. It began with the sounds of nature: birds waking in the early light, animals moving inside their shelters, the opening of wooden doors, the first conversations between neighbors, the preparation of fires, the sound of tools beginning another day of work. The rhythm of life was created by simple and familiar sounds. The smell of a medieval settlement was also very different from a modern town. There were smells from cooking fires, animals, forests, fields, and workshops. A blacksmith's area carried the smell of smoke and heated metal. A bakery carried the smell of fresh bread. A farm carried the smell of animals and soil. A forest settlement carried the smell of wood and plants. These smells were not considered unusual. They were simply part of daily existence. The materials surrounding people were mostly natural: wood, stone, leather, wool, clay, metal. People interacted directly with the materials that created their world. A carpenter understood the qualities of different trees. A potter understood how clay reacted to heat. A blacksmith understood how metal changed under fire. Craftsmanship depended on close observation. The hands of skilled workers contain knowledge developed through years of experience. A modern person may look at a medieval object and see only a simple tool. But for the person who created it, that object represented knowledge and effort. A knife was not just a piece of metal. It required mining resources, producing iron, shaping the blade, creating a handle, and maintaining the final product. A wooden chair was not just wood. It required choosing the right tree, cutting the material, shaping the pieces, and assembling them. Every object had a story before it reached its owner. This relationship with objects influenced how people valued possessions. Because production required so much effort, people usually owned fewer things. A household might contain only the items considered necessary: cooking equipment, tools, clothing, storage containers, furniture. Each possession had a clear purpose. The idea of collecting large numbers of objects simply for decoration was uncommon among ordinary families. A person's wealth was often visible through useful things: more animals, better tools, larger storage supplies, higher quality clothing, more durable buildings. Practical resources represented security. Security was one of the greatest concerns of medieval life. The world contained many uncertainties, and people looked for ways to protect themselves. Protection could come from family, from community, from religious faith, from powerful local figures, from physical structures. This explains the importance of defensive buildings during the medieval period. Castles and fortified settlements were not only symbols of power. They were responses to a world where conflict could happen. However, most people did not live inside castles. The majority of medieval Europeans lived in ordinary settlements far away from royal courts and major battles. Their experience of conflict was often indirect. They might hear about wars through travelers. They might provide supplies to armies passing through. They might experience changes in taxes or obligations. Only a smaller number of people were directly involved in warfare. The image of the medieval world as a place where everyone was constantly fighting is therefore misleading. For most people, ordinary life continued. Fields still needed planting. Animals still needed care. Families still needed food. Even during periods of conflict, many people tried to maintain normal routines. The relationship between warfare and daily life was complicated. Warriors had a special role in society. Military skill was highly valued among certain groups, especially nobles. A trained warrior needed physical strength, discipline, and access to expensive equipment. Weapons and armor required skilled craftsmen and significant resources. A soldier's life was very different from that of a farmer. Training, travel, and combat created different experiences. However, the warrior class depended completely on the labor of others. Without farmers producing food, armies could not function. Without craftsmen creating equipment, soldiers could not maintain their tools. Without communities supporting resources, campaigns could not continue. The military world and the everyday world were connected. Another important aspect of medieval society was justice. Communities needed ways to solve disagreements. Conflicts over land, property, debts, or personal disputes were common. Without modern legal systems, local customs played a major role. Many communities relied on respected individuals to help resolve problems. Local leaders, religious figures, or officials could act as mediators. The goal was often not only punishment, but restoring balance. Maintaining peace within a community was essential because people depended on continued relationships. A long-lasting conflict between neighbors could damage the entire settlement. However, medieval justice could also be harsh. Punishments varied depending on the region, social position, and type of offense. The idea of law was strongly connected to tradition and authority. People understood justice through the customs of their own society. What seems unusual from a modern perspective was often considered normal within the medieval world. This reminds us that every historical period must be understood within its own conditions. The people of the early Middle Ages did not see their world as primitive. They saw it as the world they knew. They developed solutions for their problems. They created systems that helped them survive. They built communities that lasted. And although their daily lives were very different from ours, their basic experiences remained deeply human. The medieval world was built not only with stone and wood. It was built inside the small spaces where people spent most of their lives. The house was the true center of early medieval existence. For many people, almost everything happened within a single building. The home was not only a place to sleep. It was a kitchen, a workshop, a storage area, and a gathering place at the same time. The design of these homes was shaped by necessity. Most ordinary houses were simple structures created from materials available nearby. In forest regions, wood was the main resource. In areas where stone was easier to obtain, stronger stone buildings became more common. A typical village house was usually small and practical. The walls were often made from wooden frames filled with mixtures of clay, straw, and other natural materials. The roof was commonly made from plants such as reeds or straw, depending on the region. These homes were built for survival, not luxury. Keeping warmth inside during winter was one of the greatest challenges. A fireplace or central fire area was extremely important. It provided heat, light, and a place to cook food. Smoke from the fire often filled the interior because many homes did not have advanced ventilation systems. For modern people, this environment would feel uncomfortable. But for medieval families, it was normal. They adapted to living with smoke, changing temperatures, and limited space because these conditions were part of everyday life. The arrangement of the home depended greatly on the wealth of the family. A poor farming family might live in a single-room structure where everyone shared the same space. A wealthier household might have separate areas for sleeping, storage, animals, and work. Privacy was a rare luxury. Several family members often slept in the same area. Children grew up surrounded by the activities of adults. They heard conversations, watched work being done, and learned through constant observation. The home itself became a place of education. There were no separate classrooms for most children. Instead, knowledge was transferred through daily life. A child learned farming by watching fields being prepared. They learned cooking by helping in the household. They learned craftsmanship by observing skilled workers. The environment around them was their school. The interior of a medieval home contained fewer objects than many modern homes. Furniture was limited. A table, benches, storage chests, cooking equipment, and sleeping materials were often among the most important items. Wooden chests were especially valuable because they protected important possessions. A chest might contain clothing, tools, documents, or family items passed down through generations. Owning such objects represented stability. The kitchen area was one of the most active parts of the home. Cooking required constant attention because food preparation was a daily responsibility. Unlike modern kitchens, there were no refrigerators, electric ovens, or specialized appliances. Every meal depended on available ingredients and careful preparation. Fire had to be maintained. Water had to be collected. Food had to be cleaned and prepared manually. A simple meal could require hours of work before it reached the table. Bread was one of the most important foods, but producing bread involved many steps. Grain needed to be grown, harvested, dried, and stored. Then it needed to be ground into flour. Finally, the dough had to be prepared and baked. The bread eaten by a family represented a long chain of labor. Other foods depended on the season. During summer and autumn, fresh vegetables and fruits were more available. During winter, people relied more heavily on stored foods. Preservation methods were essential. Drying, smoking, and salting allowed people to keep food available when fresh supplies were limited. The medieval kitchen was therefore not only a place of cooking. It was a place where survival was organized. Every decision mattered. How much grain was used today? How much should be saved for later? Which foods could last through winter? These questions influenced daily life. Even small mistakes could have serious consequences. Food was closely connected to social position. A noble household could access a wider variety of products, including foods that ordinary villagers rarely experienced. Spices, imported goods, and expensive ingredients demonstrated wealth because they required long-distance trade networks. For ordinary people, meals were usually based on local production. Their diet reflected the land around them. People living near the sea had different food traditions from those living inland. Communities near forests used different resources from farming villages. Geography shaped the dinner table. The home, therefore, was a reflection of the entire medieval world. Its materials showed the environment. Its size showed social position. Its contents showed occupation. Its routines showed the priorities of survival. Behind every simple doorway was a complete world of work, family, and tradition. Behind every simple doorway was a complete world of work, family, and tradition. Yet the medieval home was not only shaped by what happened inside it. The area surrounding a house was equally important. A village was not a random collection of buildings placed together. Its layout reflected the needs, fears, and habits of the people who lived there. Most early medieval villages developed naturally over time rather than being planned according to strict designs. Houses appeared near useful resources such as water sources, fertile land, forests, and important paths. The location of a settlement could determine whether a community survived. A village near a reliable river had advantages. Water was needed for drinking, cooking, animals, cleaning, and sometimes transportation. Rivers could also provide fish and create connections with other settlements. However, living near water also created risks. Floods could destroy crops and damage homes. Communities had to understand the landscape around them and choose locations carefully. The center of village life was often an open area where people gathered. This space could be used for meetings, markets, celebrations, or important announcements. Before modern communication methods existed, information spread through personal contact. A person arriving with news from another region could become the center of attention. A local leader making an announcement could affect the daily activities of everyone nearby. The village was therefore not only a physical place. It was a network of information. People knew what was happening because they lived close to one another. The sounds of a medieval village would change throughout the day. Early morning brought the beginning of activity. Animals were moved. Fires were started. Tools were prepared. During the day, different sounds filled the settlement. The hammering of a blacksmith, the movement of carts, the voices of people working, the sounds of animals, the conversations between neighbors. As evening arrived, the village became quieter. The absence of artificial lighting transformed the rhythm of life. Darkness was a powerful force. Without modern lamps, the night limited activity. People finished outdoor tasks earlier. Travel became more dangerous. Work requiring precision became difficult. The night belonged mostly to rest, conversation, and indoor activities. This relationship with darkness affected the way medieval people experienced time. The modern idea of staying active throughout the night was unusual. After sunset, many communities naturally slowed down. The sky itself became a guide. The position of the sun determined the rhythm of work. The seasons determined the rhythm of the year. Nature controlled the schedule. Another important feature of medieval villages was the presence of animals. Animals were not separated from human life in the way they often are today. A household could include chickens, pigs, sheep, goats, cows, and other animals living very close to people. This arrangement was practical. Animals provided food, materials, and labor. Keeping them nearby made care easier. However, it also meant that daily life involved constant contact with animals. The sounds and smells of livestock were normal parts of village existence. For many families, animals represented security. A healthy animal could provide valuable resources for years. A sick or lost animal could create serious problems. The care of animals required knowledge and attention. Farmers needed to understand feeding, breeding, seasonal changes, and signs of illness. This knowledge was often more valuable than written information because it directly affected survival. Beyond the houses and animals, fields shaped the landscape around medieval villages. The fields were not simply places where food was produced. They were carefully organized spaces reflecting centuries of experience. Farmers understood which areas were more productive. They understood which crops worked best in certain soils. They understood when the land needed rest. Although farming methods varied across Europe, agriculture required constant observation. A field could not simply be planted and forgotten. It needed attention throughout the entire growing season. The relationship between villages and surrounding forests was also important. Forests were sources of many materials. Wood provided fuel and building materials. Wild plants provided food and medicine. Animals provided additional resources. However, forests were also places of uncertainty. They represented areas beyond direct human control. Many medieval stories and beliefs connected forests with mystery. Dark woods appeared in legends as places where unusual events could happen. For ordinary people, forests were both useful and potentially dangerous. They were places of opportunity, but also places requiring caution. The boundaries between human settlements and wilderness were much closer than they are in many modern societies. A person could leave a village and quickly enter an environment where human presence was limited. This closeness to nature influenced medieval imagination. The natural world was not a distant background. It was an active part of daily existence. Weather, animals, forests, rivers, and seasons constantly affected human decisions. People did not simply live near nature. They lived within it. This is one of the greatest differences between the early medieval world and modern life. Today, many people can separate themselves from natural cycles. Food arrives from distant places. Buildings protect against weather. Technology reduces dependence on daylight. Transportation removes many limits created by distance. Early medieval people had far fewer barriers between themselves and the environment. Their lives were directly connected to the land around them. Every harvest, every storm, every winter, and every season left a visible mark on their existence. The village was therefore not just a place where people lived. It was a small world where humans, animals, landscapes, and traditions existed together. The village was therefore not just a place where people lived. It was a small world where humans, animals, landscapes, and traditions existed together. Within this small world, one of the most important parts of life was maintaining health and cleanliness. Modern people often imagine the Middle Ages as a time when everyone ignored hygiene, but reality was more complicated. The understanding of cleanliness was different, but people were not unaware of the importance of staying healthy. They understood that dirt, spoiled food, and unpleasant environments could cause problems. Their methods were limited compared to modern standards, but they still developed habits to protect themselves. Water was central to daily cleanliness. People needed water for drinking, preparing food, washing clothes, and personal care. Access to clean water was one of the most important advantages a settlement could have. Villages were often built near rivers, streams, or wells because water influenced almost every part of life. Collecting water was usually a daily responsibility. In many households, carrying water from a nearby source required significant physical effort. Containers had to be filled and transported back to the home. The distance between a house and a water source could greatly affect daily routines. A nearby well could save hours of work. A distant river could make ordinary tasks much more difficult. Bathing habits varied greatly depending on location, culture, wealth, and time period. The idea that medieval people never washed is inaccurate. Many communities valued washing, especially when water was easily available. However, bathing was not always a frequent activity for everyone. Heating large amounts of water required fuel and time. For poorer households, this could make regular bathing difficult. Instead, people often focused on washing parts of the body, cleaning hands and faces, and maintaining clothing. Clothing itself played an important role in cleanliness. Because garments were valuable, people took care of them. They repaired damaged areas, removed dirt, and cleaned fabrics when possible. A person's appearance was connected to social expectations. Even without modern ideas about hygiene, looking presentable mattered. The wealthier members of society had greater access to comfort. Noble households could have larger bathing areas, servants who assisted with cleaning, and more clothing available. They could change garments more often and spend more resources on personal care. For ordinary villagers, cleanliness was closely connected to practicality. A person needed to protect their limited possessions while managing daily responsibilities. Laundry was a difficult task. Without modern washing machines, cleaning clothing required manual labor. Water had to be collected. Fabrics had to be washed by hand. Heavy garments needed significant effort to clean and dry. Because of this, people did not change clothing as frequently as many modern societies do. Instead, they focused on maintaining and repairing what they owned. The condition of clothing also depended on occupation. A farmer working outdoors would naturally have different clothing needs than someone working in a monastery or noble household. The body itself carried evidence of a person's daily activities. Without modern medicine, many illnesses that are easily treated today could become dangerous. A simple infection could develop into a serious condition. An injury could prevent someone from working. A disease spreading through a community could affect many families at once. Understanding illness was based on the knowledge available at the time. People observed symptoms. They developed traditional treatments. They used plants and natural materials. They relied on experienced healers. Some treatments were practical and based on observation. Others were connected to beliefs about the body and the spiritual world. Medicine in the early. One important source of medical knowledge came from older civilizations. Texts from earlier periods were preserved and copied in certain places, especially within religious communities. Although access to these writings was limited, they influenced the development of medieval medical ideas. Monasteries played a role in preserving knowledge and sometimes caring for the sick. A monastery could contain gardens where medicinal plants were grown. Monks studied texts that described treatments and observations from previous generations. However, medical care remained very different from modern healthcare. Doctors did not have knowledge of bacteria, viruses, or many causes of disease. Surgery was dangerous. Pain control was limited. Many conditions could not be effectively treated. Because of these limitations, prevention and luck played major roles in survival. People also connected illness with spiritual explanations. Religion shaped how many medieval communities understood suffering. Prayer and religious rituals were often part of the response to illness. This does not mean medieval people ignored practical treatment. They often combined different approaches. A person might use a traditional remedy while also seeking spiritual support. The physical and spiritual worlds were deeply connected in medieval thinking. Another major health challenge was childbirth. For women, pregnancy and childbirth were among the most dangerous experiences of life. Without modern medical support, complications could quickly become serious. Women often relied on the knowledge of experienced family members or midwives. Midwives played an important role in communities. They understood pregnancy, birth, and basic care for mothers and newborn children. Their knowledge was passed from one generation to another. The survival of both mother and child depended on experience, preparation, and circumstances, and it connected the newest generation to all those who came before. Health, illness, and childbirth were therefore not separate parts of medieval life. They were connected to family, community, belief, and survival. The human body was always part of the larger medieval world. A person's health affected the household affected the village, and the village depended on every person who lived within it. The early Middle Ages were not only an age of castles and warriors. They were also an age of ordinary people whose names have been forgotten, but whose lives shaped the world that followed. Behind every field, every village, every road, and every old stone wall was a human story. A story of work, a story of patience, a story of survival, a story of everyday life. And perhaps the most interesting part of history is not always found in the actions of famous rulers or the outcomes of great battles. Sometimes, history is hidden in the quiet moments. A farmer watching the first light of morning, a family gathering beside a warm fire, a craftsman carefully creating something with their hands, a child listening to stories from an older generation. These small moments may seem ordinary, but they were the foundation of an entire civilization. Thousands of years have passed since those people walked through their villages, worked their fields, and looked at the same stars above the night sky. Their houses have disappeared. Their voices have faded. Their names are mostly unknown, but the traces of their lives remain. They remind us that history is not only made by those who are remembered, it is also made by those who quietly lived, worked, loved, and hoped for the future. So as this journey through the early Middle Ages comes to an end, imagine the quiet villages slowly becoming dark. The last fires are beginning to fade. The sounds of the day are disappearing. The fields are resting beneath the night sky. Families are closing their doors and preparing for another morning. Another day will come. Another season will arrive. And another generation will continue the endless story of human life. Tonight, we leave behind the villages, forests, and fields of the early Middle Ages. We leave behind the footsteps of people who lived centuries ago, and we carry with us a small memory of their world, a slower world, a quieter world, a world built by ordinary people. Thank you for spending this peaceful journey through history with us. Now, allow the sounds of the medieval past to slowly disappear. Let the old roads become quiet. Let the distant villages rest. And let your mind drift gently into the calm of the night. Good night, and sleep well.